that's what you do. All the morning sun and all its glory. Grace is there with hope and comfort too. And you fill my life with laughter. You can make it better. Ease my troubles, that's what you do. Brother, love is divine. And it's yours and it's mine, like the sun. At the end of the day, we should give thanks and pray to the one. Say, have I told you lately that I love you?
Okay, hello and welcome. Not very many of you, but we are going to make it a small but intimate gathering over the next 15 weeks. Quick question for you. How many people have been taught by me either last semester or so far this semester? Okay, a few of you, that's fine. Sorry, you're probably going to hit snooze for the first few slides when I talk about me, or you can fill in the blanks as well, because I often miss out different bits and pieces. Come sit down. Okay, so this is Gero 520. Anybody thinks this is a different place, then you might want to select a different program. But we are going to be looking today at what Gero 520 is, and also what you want it to be. So, because I'm very much of the mindset that I want to deliver the content that you want to learn about, there are certain things obviously you have to learn about, and it is obviously within the frame of gerontology and within the frame of psychology. But if it's a particular topic or a particular area that you're interested in, drop me an email, let me know, and I will try to make sure that it is included. So for example, if you're interested in driving, I can tell you now there's something in on driving. If you're interested in dementia, then there's something on dementia. If you're interested in aging in Latin America, there's stuff in there. So just let me know what kinds of thing you're interested in and we can try to work it in. Similarly, if you've got a particular taste in music and you want that to be playing when you walk in one day, then maybe we can even discuss that as long as it's on my iPod. We're also going to talk today about the objectives of Gero 520, what it is that you will be learning, what we're going to be doing week by week by week by week for you, and we're also going to go through the assessments. So how many of you have actually looked at the syllabus already? How many of you have noted the purposeful mistake that's in there? Good, because there shouldn't be. We're also going to talk about the study guides, and we're going to look at what we're going to be discussing week by week. Then you're going to have a little bit of a break, and then I'm going to throw you right into doing some demography. So we're going to start talking about the demographic transition model. Anybody heard of that one yet? No? Fabulous. Okay, so everybody give a wave over to Kelly. Kelly is going to be the most important person for all of you. Kelly is co-instructing this with me. So Kelly is going to be dealing with a lot of your queries on Blackboard, etc., etc. And she's also the person you need to be really nice to because she's the nicer one when it comes to grading. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me first, and then I'm going to usher Kelly up here and she can tell you all about herself. So, apologies for those people who've heard it this morning or earlier on. You can take a little bit of a snooze. But, as you can tell from the accent, I am not from California. I'm originally from Mississippi. One person laughs. Originally from Wales in the United Kingdom. And I've moved over here about 18 months ago. So, by my qualifications, I'm a chartered psychologist. So I worked in the UK and got my undergraduate, master's and PhD over there and became a chartered psychologist and working in a centre for gerontology there. I've also become registered as a QSR international trainer. So if you're interested in different research methodologies or when you're reading papers and you hear or read one that is about qualitative data, then that would have been analysed using a program called NVivo. and I'm one of the trainers for QSR International who developed that software. So if you've got any questions or queries, you can always come and see me about that, especially if you're doing 593 research methods as well. I'm also part of the Higher Education Academy in the UK, so I'm a fellow of that, which basically lets you know as a bit of a rubber stamp that I know what I'm doing when it comes to teaching as well. And I've not done too badly since I've been here as well. So, as I mentioned, I'm originally, or I've just come from Wales, this part, but originally, how many of you have heard of Shakespeare? A few of you. That's where I'm from, that's from. So, Stratford-upon-Avon. Any of you been there? It's very pretty. If you get the chance to go, they've got lots of canals and waterways and theatres. So yeah, that's where I'm from, very sleepy little town. So after that point, I moved to South Wales, where I did my undergraduate in psychology, my master's in research methods, and my PhD in social research psychology. From that point, I moved to Swansea, where we set up, my boss and I set up the Centre for Innovative Aging, the CIA, the real CIA. Just don't tell current number 45 about that. We set up the CIA, and in the UK, we didn't have, or in Swansea, sorry, we didn't have a gerontological department. We set that up. And in the 10 years that I was there, we went from being non-existent to ranked number 1 in the UK. From 2012, when I took over as a lecturer, there was no academic courses. And in the time from 2012 to when I left, we had 4 courses. All 4 were ranked 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the UK for being the best courses in social gerontology. So we're doing something right, and we're bringing that over here. So about 18 months ago, I moved over to California, over here, and started teaching at the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, got very much thrown into doing the teaching, and thankfully, they like me enough to give me some courses that I like teaching. So you'll hear that I get a little animated at times. That can be good, but it also might be off-putting. So let me know if you don't understand anything I say, because I often let everything out at 100 miles an hour. So the work that I've done, as I mentioned, I started at Swansea University, and I was there for 10 years, working my way up from a research assistant all the way up then as a lecturer to a senior lecturer to a program director and associate professor. And that's when I moved over here. I was also the General Secretary for the British Society of Gerontology. So how many of you are members of the Gerontological Society of America? Got 1, 2 people who are members. So the Gerontological Society of America is basically the organization to which all gerontologists in America really belong, and also as fellows from around the world as well. In the UK, we have the British Society of Gerontology, which is a little bit smaller, considerably, but I would argue be just as good. I also work currently with the World Health Organization on their campaign to challenge ageism. There was also a little report out, just a tiny, teeny report, called the World Report on Health and Aging. It is free to download from their website and has an amazing section on ageism, if you're interested. How do I know it's so amazing, you ask? Because I wrote it, I'm telling you. So if you want to read that, it's probably going to make up part of your exam as well. USC, I'm trying to think where we were then. USC is also the first age-friendly university in California. So it's part of a global network of universities that are opening up education to older students, but also making sure that all areas of the campus and all areas of the programming are accessible to people of all ages. Okay? And we're going to come back to that one later on at the end when we're talking about the International Day of Older People. Finally, I'm also a member of the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics. So in the last 18 months, I've been put onto the Global Social Initiatives on Aging Task Force, which is basically challenged for developing gerontological programming and critical mass in gerontologists throughout Latin America as well. So I'm currently working on that. So if you've got any interests in these areas, please let me know. Obviously, I will talk your ears off. I might even, if you're really nice, buy you a coffee and we can talk about this. But similarly, we can also talk about trying to encourage and incorporate this into 520 programming as well. So what are my areas of research? Well, I love research methods. So generally, I've been working with the lab that Kelly is associated with, helping with their qualitative data analysis. But I'm just generally interested in research, which is quite good because I get involved in a lot, but it's also quite bad because I get involved in a lot. And I can't really say no to things. But as I said, the World Report on Aging and Health is something I have been involved in. So my main area of focus is actually ageism, discrimination, and prejudice. So that's what I got my PhD in, and it's also what I've been working with both the WHO and also the UN on. Similarly, at the moment, I've just started a new stream of work which builds on ageism and has managed to secure ROA, which is the research on older adults with HIV, that data set and data collection to USC. So that's a big national data set, and we're now analyzing that data here to actually provide advice to the government, looking at the intersection between HIV stigma and ageism. Similarly, I'm quite interested in the first project I ever was started on was on housing. So if you're interested in the different housing options that are available, you can either come and talk to me, or you can wait until after Christmas and you can buy the textbook that I'm just finishing, which has got a lovely section on housing for older adults. And finally, I was one of two people that set up the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Aging and Gerontology, known as CIRAG, in India, which was the first interdisciplinary research center in India. And we've just seen our second student go through her PhD as well. So we've done quite well in keeping that going, especially seeing as my boss in the UK has now moved to New Zealand, and I moved over here. So we're still keeping in contact. So it just shows you that we can keep global gerontology going pretty much wherever we are. So I hope you don't mind me stealing this picture off the internet for you, Kelly. This is Kelly and Jim. Jim, you will get to know very intimately because I generally can't do things very well with technology, and Jim steps in to save the day. And Kelly will tell you all about her fabulous self. There you go.
I wasn't prepared for that, but that's okay. Hi, so I just graduated from the MSG program myself in May. So I've taken a couple of Paul's classes and bang on his door quite a bit when I have questions about research methods and qualitative research and all of that sort of thing. But I came into gerontology after a separate career in entertainment and theater. I used to work at 20th Century Fox, and I was a freelance director here in Los Angeles. But from when I was a kid, I had been a caregiver. And my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the age of 48. And I was her only kid, and she was a single mom. So my whole life has been a social policy class, pretty much. But then I got really interested in creativity and aging. So I started a little nonprofit company called the 40 Over 50 Project, which was a script writing and storytelling workshop for men and women over 50. And then I went to the National Conference on Creativity and Aging in DC, and I met some people from USC, and they were like, you should come and apply. And I was like, I don't think I can get in. And they were like, we think you can. So I did, and I got in, and I just graduated, and I've been working with Kate Wilbur in the Secure Old Age Lab. I've been working on something called Care Journey, and also the Forensic Center Service Advocate Wicked Problem of Elder Mistreatment. I've been working on those two projects pretty exclusively, but like Paul, I'm also interested in topics on ageism and discrimination, and of course, creativity and aging as well. So I think that's kind of everything.
There you go. That's not just everything. I think a round of applause there. And thank you very much for allowing me to put you on the spot there. Okay, so Kelly will be one of the people that is going to be attacking you all with microphones, the same as I will. So if we've got any questions or you've got any questions, you have to raise your hand. Unfortunately, going back to elementary school days, we have to do everything via microphone, and I'll explain to you why later. So I'm going to highlight a few potential issues for you. First of all, many of you will speak American. This is not English. I will always speak English. I apologize for this. That means that when I write the word aging, it will have an E in it. When I write the word color, it will have a U in it. When I analyze things, it might not necessarily have Zs in it. So there are going to be different things that are going to be slightly different. So if you do notice certain spellings that are slightly different or obscure, then they're probably either, I'm going to say the British spellings, I've not made a mistake. But feel free, if you want to write aging with an E, you can do. If you want to write it without an E, you can do. But just to let you know that there will be certain differences. Also, as I mentioned before, I speak very quickly. So if there is anything you have not heard, anything you are unsure of, you're probably not the only person that hasn't heard it or misheard it. So please put your hand up. I will slow down, I will stop, and I will repeat, and I will rephrase it. So just ask. It is a safe space. You're able to do this. And I also want to know all about you too. So I have put onto Blackboard a discussion forum whereby I want to hear about you. I want to know what your interests are within Gero 520, but I really want to know what it is that you want to study as well. So please make sure you fill that out. However, when we come on to discuss what the criteria for assessment are, introducing yourself on Blackboard is not worthy of points, I'm afraid. That's just for us to try and get to know you and for you to get to know the online students. So, what is Gero 520? Well, we look at human cognition. We look at the psychology behind aging. But we're not just looking at the psychology of an individual, we're looking at the psychology of a society. What are the perceptions around aging? What are the misconceptions? And hopefully we're going to bust a few of those myths together. We also look at intergenerational contact, what that actually means, what the benefits of intergenerational solidarity are, and what are the changing rules around filial piety. So are we actually looking after our parents now, or are we shoving everyone into a nursing home when they reach the age of 50? Something that we'll hopefully discuss over the coming weeks. And we also look at caregiving. So Kelly mentioned it briefly, but there's so many things to caregiving. Most people who are caregivers wouldn't actually identify themselves as caregivers. They see it as part of a role that they've just undertaken. But what we find now is a lot of people are in what we call a sandwich generation. So there might be adults in their 30s, 40s looking after their own children, but also looking after their older adult parents. So we find this more and more. And especially when we're looking at older adults who are aging in place, many can only do this because of that informal care network that they have, especially in somewhere like America, where they get charged through the nose for healthcare provision. And one thing that I'm going to try and do for you is make everything contextually applied. So we're going to talk about a lot of theories. So today, for example, we're going to talk about the demographic transition model. That's a bit yawny, to be honest with you. It's a bit boring. But what we're going to do is we're going to put it into context for you to show you which countries are going through what and how that actually applies to general society. So as I mentioned before, this is a blended class, which means we have online students and we have in-class students. So seeing as you're all so very animated already, I want you to do a quick hello to all of the online students. Thank you. They are watching you. There are cameras. These are not only so I can spy on what love letters you're writing to each other on your laptops during my lessons, but it's also so the online students can see you as well. So these lectures are all recorded. So if you aren't well at some point and you can't make a class, then you can catch up online. Obviously, as in-class students, you are expected to be here, though, every week. The things with the blended classrooms, they are slightly different. So how many of you have seen or been watching Stranger Things? Okay, fabulous. Good program. I've just come to the end of season 3. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But anyway, the only reason I mention that is when somebody dials in using that number above, which isn't very clear at the moment because of the black line that goes through it, but if somebody dials in, then you get kind of Stranger Things kind of vibe noise coming on, and people will start to talk live to us. But most people will watch asynchronously. Okay? What I'm going to try and do is this slightly more difficult than a practical class, but we're going to try and create a blended environment. So it'd be really good if you can actually start to interact with each other on Blackboard, both the online class, but also the domestic in-class students as well. So we will be talking about ways in which we're going to try and encourage that later on. So what are the objectives of this class? What am I going to try and instill in you? Well, I want you to understand what methodologies we're using, especially when we're looking at different populations. So what kind of research methods can we use for older adults who are living with dementia? What about older adults who are living in rural communities that might not be able to communicate through the written form? We're also going to look at the interplay between aging theories and the context in which that they apply. So here what we're going to be doing is saying, well, actually, it's all very well and good understanding what ageism is as a concept, but what implications does that have on us as a society? What implications does ageism have on younger people? Because ageism isn't just prejudice against older people, but also against younger people too. So believe it or not, when I first started teaching back in a long time ago, I actually looked quite young. And I had quite a lot of people saying, well, why are you teaching us? What do you know? And I generally had to prove myself. I've kind of got a few more grey hairs now, and I don't necessarily have to prove myself quite as much, but hopefully you'll enjoy the context that we have anyway for these classes. And I'm going to give you a little bit more of an insight into some really complex issues around the world. Similarly, as I said, if there's something you're interested in, please, please, please let me know, and I will work it into the lectures. And if I work it into the lectures, however, it will be worked into the exams. So what are we covering? Well, how many of you have said you've downloaded the syllabus so far? Oh, most of you. Good, good, good. Okay, so we're going to start off this week doing a little bit of research on aging. So this is going to be the human demography side. The reason why I'm doing it the first week is because it forms the foundation to everything else. You would almost think that I've done a little bit of planning too, because each week basically builds on the last. So at the start of every lecture, I mean literally the start of every lecture, Kelly and myself will be walking around with a microphone, and we will ask you what were the key things that we learnt last week. And the reason why we do that is, one, to make sure that you've done the stuff and you understand what we went through the previous week, but also because each week we build on what we've done. So for example, when we're looking at physiological change in week 3, we're going to be using stuff around subjectivity around aging, so how somebody feels that they're aging. When we talk about global aging and driving, we're going to be looking at physiological changes as well as that demography that we've covered this week. When it comes to memory and attention, we're going to be referring to things that we've learned in week 3 with physiological changes, and so on and so forth. What you'll also notice is that each week, I haven't just randomly put this here, I've actually put a series of articles on Blackboard for you. This is because I'm just lovely. So what I've done is I've said, no, we will not be using a textbook. So there is no textbook for you to buy. Yay. So what instead you have is articles. There's about 4 articles per week that I have put into a folder for you on Blackboard. I haven't given you the links for them. I've actually given you the full papers, so you can read them. Okay? This isn't a huge amount of work. It's no worse than being asked to read a section in a textbook, except this saves you a lot of money, because the textbooks in Gero are not cheap, especially the psych ones. Apart from the one that I'm going to be writing, which after Christmas should be available, and it'll be about $40. Feel free to buy it. Basically, that's my retirement scheme, so you've got to help me out here. So they're available each week. The discussions that we've got, which, as you can see, are going to be available or going to be due each week, are going to be based on the topics that we've covered in lectures, but are supported by the content in the articles that I have posted online. Does that make sense? So the lecture will be given. Then once you've had the lecture, you go and read the articles. The discussion that I post will be based on that content. Okay? You'll also see that this year, you have fall recess. This has never happened before. So USC has decided that as you have a spring break in springtime, you're now having a fall break in the fall. However, you don't get a week, you get 2 days. You're just lucky enough that it falls on a Thursday. So this year, fall recess is a Thursday and a Friday, which means you get 1 less lesson with me. You might think that's a good thing, you might think that's a bad thing. You'll only find out over the next 15 weeks. We're going to move on after that point. We're going to look at personality. We're going to look at attitudes. And you're going to have a virtual lecture on memory in week 12. The reason why you're going to have a virtual lecture is because I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be in Austin, Texas, at the Gerontological Society of America's annual conference. So I'd love to do that. I'd love to be here for you, but I'm giving a couple of papers there, so it'll be kind of nice. So if you're interested and you want to come along to the GSA and you've got a few $1,000 spare, then feel free to come along. Also, you get week 14 as Thanksgiving off. And because you have so many weeks off, you have not got class time when it comes to the exams, okay? So I'll go through the exam structure very shortly, but you do not have class time for the exams, I'm sorry. Okay, so you've got everything that's due down the one side. So what are these assessed components? Well, you have two exams. You have a midterm and you have a final. For each, they are delivered online. For each, they are 3 hours long. I know you're automatically going, oh my God, 3 hours. It will not take you 3 hours. Not even if you do it blindfolded with your hands tied behind your back, writing only in Morse code. It really will not take you that long at all, but I want to make sure you've got plenty of thinking time for this. Okay? You will have 50 points worth of short answer questions. You will have 50 points worth of multiple choice questions. Okay? So it's not a huge amount. There's no extended essays. In the midterm, you will have everything that you have covered up to that week. Okay? So you'll have everything that's covered up to that week. The final will cover everything from the midterm until the final. Okay? So there are no cumulative exams. They are both basically covering half of the material each. You can say thank you again later, it's fine. The midterm has to be completed by the dates given here. It opens 1 week before. So it is your responsibility to make sure that you have completed the exam. Okay? I have given you the dates. I will tell you when the exam is going live, but it is your responsibility. Not that any of you would, but these are to be done independently. Your IP addresses are monitored, so we'll know that if you've done it at the same time from the same place, there's a likelihood of collaboration. Also, as I've had in previous academic institutions, if you put the same answer, including the same spelling mistake as somebody else, then I'm also going to guess that you have worked together on it as well. Those things are not allowed. So make sure that you are doing it from wherever you like in the world. It's not a problem, but you have to make sure you have a strong, stable internet connection. Okay? Because once it logs you out, your final score is recorded. And only if you bring me birthday presents, Christmas presents, and snacks for the holidays will I make sure I reset it for you. No, no snacks. So the final is due to be completed by the 17th of December. I know that seems relatively late. That is not a date that we have come up with. Okay, that is a university mandated day. Again, it'll be open for a week before. So if you want to go away earlier on a Christmas vacation, you can do. The research synopsis paper. So as I mentioned, there is a folder online that I have placed on Blackboard with journal articles. Again, I have read each and every one of these articles because I've screened them to make sure they're good enough for you. There are variations in types of methodology, also variations in actually the quality of these papers, but I've placed them all on Blackboard. What you have to do is select any two that you are interested in, any two, and you have to give a synopsis of this. This basically means, as I've written in the syllabus for you, which I'm sure you've all read and ingested and understood, is that you have to basically give a summary of the paper. So I'm not asking you just to cut and paste bits of it, as we'll go over later on. I'm just asking you to put it into your own words, explain what the findings are, explain what the implications are, just to show that you have really understood the paper. If you're reading a paper and you don't understand it, don't pick it to do a summary on. Okay? There are many, 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 many papers that I've given you. You only have to select two. Okay? Each paper, the summary is 2 pages long. Okay? You have 2 papers at 2 pages, which makes a total of 4 pages. So that submission is 4 pages long. Okay? Not each paper, but together, and you have to submit them at the same time as one document because Blackboard only allows you to have one submission. So don't submit one thing and then one other thing. Put them together in one document and then submit it once you've done both. Is that clear? Yes. Fabulous. Participatory inclusion, that's a really fancy way of saying Blackboard discussions. Okay, so each and every week, Kelly will be monitoring your Blackboard discussions, and I will be posting after the lecture each week a question for you. That question is something that I'd love you to have a discussion about. This isn't just an assessment exercise. This is actually hoping to get a discussion going for you between the online students and also the class students, all of you. So the minimum requirement is that you make one original post, that you comment on somebody else's post, and that the posts and comments that you make are more than, yes, I agree. Okay? They've got to be a real thought through, rationalized post. Okay? We're not expecting like War and Peace each time. We're not expecting page on pages, about 150, 200 words, something like that, as a small piece to write each week. It's not a huge amount, and mainly they're going to be opinion pieces. They have to be your own words, and they have to be related to the comment or the question that I post on Blackboard. So you get 3 marks. There are 3 marks available, or 3 points available each week. 1 for making your post, 1 for responding to somebody else, and 1 for having a decent quality of post. Okay? So if you just write, yes, I agree, you're not going to get that 3rd mark. And these are really easy points to get. But similarly, if you don't post them, they're really easy points to lose. These are due by the start of the lecture each week. So after this lecture, what I will do is I'll go upstairs, I'll run up the stairs quickly, and I'll make a posting of a question. I will then close the post, so the post will then not be available for you to comment on at the start of next week's lecture. Okay? So you only have a week to make those comments. It's easier for everybody if you make those comments earlier on, because everybody has to make a response to somebody else's post. So if you all wait until the last minute, you're all going to have to make something really fabulous in almost 30 seconds. So you can't do it. So the earlier you do it, the better for everybody. Okay, is everything clear about the participatory marks? Fabulous. And then we have our term paper. This is the jewel in the crown of the assessment for this module, or this course. It's worth 20% of your final paper, and it's basically where I throw the gauntlet open to you. So what we're interested in here is media representations of aging. So I want you to select 3 pieces of media. By media, what I mean is things like newspaper articles, they can be songs, song lyrics, they can be adverts, they can even be blogs, things like that that you think are really interesting, really influential. And I want you to have the media representations of aging. So there's more information in the syllabus about the kinds of discussions that we want you to be having. But essentially, I want you to be able to reflect on, well, who was the target audience for this blog, for this advert, whatever it is? Who's going to see this? What impact might it have on them? What impact might it have more socially, wider? And what are the consequences, both intended and unintended, of this? So this is 2,500 words. So this way, I'm not saying it should be 5 pages, 10 pages, 15 pages, or 20 pages long. I'm saying 2,500 words. So if you want it double-spaced, double-space it. If you want it single-spaced, single-space it. If you want it space and a half, just because you want to be a bit different, feel free. It's down to you. But 2,500 words is your maximum. If you go over that, then I might just stop reading, because that's a lot to read. And if anybody comes up to me and says, but what's the minimum? I'm going to throw a microphone at them, because the question is not what's the minimum words you can write. It's You write as much or as little as you do to answer the question fully. So if you think that you can actually get 100% by writing 300 words, write 300 words. That's great. I can tell you now you won't get 100%, but it's really down to what you feel your own argument is, what your own narrative is. And this is due by midnight on the 21st of November. However, because I'm really supportive, I believe in what we call formative learning, formative assessments, is I would love for you to submit your materials to me by the 26th of September. There we go. I'm getting used to these. So September would be great, okay? That basically means just email it to me. Don't just send me 3 pieces of media. Actually introduce yourself, say, hi, I am, this is what I'd like to do. Maybe even tell me what your narrative is. And I will give you feedback. Because there are going to be times when you might select something that's just not appropriate. For example, no TV programs, no films, because we can't spend the whole time watching a whole film. Plus, in terms of a TV program, you'd only be able to pick 1 or 2 images of what they're trying to represent. But actually, you'll find that there might be both positive and negative images of aging in there. So what I want you to do is pick something that's actually much more easily accessible and easily analyzable for yourselves. But other than that, it is very much open to you. Pick things that you're interested in. Just try not to pick 3 newspaper articles or 3 songs or 3 poems and different things. But we need to make sure that we've got copies of them, okay? Obviously, there are no grades associated with submitting your materials to me by the 26th. It is totally down to you. You don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, then you can't come crying to me after that point if you didn't understand and you've picked media that aren't appropriate. So just to go over that, we've got some examples. So as I mentioned before, you can pick songs. You can pick billboards. You can take a picture of a billboard as you're going past and go, wow, that's really ageist, or that's really good, or whatever it is. You can pick a cartoon, as long as you know where that cartoon is from. So there's no point in going onto Google or similar search engines and typing ageist cartoon, because when you're coming to talk about the impact of that cartoon, how are you going to be able to discuss that? How are you going to know where it's been used? Has it been used in a newspaper? Has it been used online? Has it been used on a blog? Where has it been used? This is really important information. So if you don't know where it's from, you can't use it. Because Google searching, and how many people are going to actually in the real world Google ageist cartoon? Nobody. Okay? So it's not going to have that impact you're going to be able to discuss. Also, you can do newspaper articles, magazine articles, as long as there's some way that we can actually access that. So it might be a case that you've got a digital copy of it, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, these, as I mentioned there, are illustrative examples, not exhaustive. So you come up with something that is fabulously innovative or something a bit different, you know what? I'm more likely going to say yes, but just ask. So both Kelly and myself are incredibly approachable. And what I would ask is if you're going to email one of us, copy the other person in as well. Because that way we know that you're getting the same information. Or if I say something that Kelly doesn't agree with, she can then respond and know that you've already had that information. Okay, so are there any questions about the assessments so far? Are you all a little bit overwhelmed with the assessments so far? Hopefully you'll find that they're not too bad. So this is the grading structure. It's the same grading structure that you'll have every other time. This might be slightly different. There are no extra credit assignments. You have weekly opportunities to get points by doing the postings on Blackboard, etc. You miss those, you miss them. If you hand in late, then you miss those opportunities as well. Okay? In terms of, we'll go down this one first. So this is not a mandatory purchase. So as listed in your syllabus, you can buy this if you want to. So this is basically an introduction book. This is something that, to be honest with you, at your level, you probably shouldn't be using. However, it does cover the basic concepts. So if, for example, you are brand fresh new to psychology and you've never heard of social identity theory, or you've never heard of I don't know, I'm trying to think of anything now that's coming to mind, but nothing is. But if you haven't thought of, or if you haven't heard of any of the basic theories that we're going over, then actually this is not a bad little reference book to go to. But I'm not going to make it a mandatory purchase because we've got all of those papers online. As is stated at the start of every lecture slide, my office hours are Monday from 11 till 2. But that doesn't mean to say that if you've got a class between those times, you can't still come and see me. We can email and make appointments outside that time. I have got flexibility, but there are certain days, for example, on a Thursday, you are never going to have an office hour with me because I teach for 3 hours before you. I then get a glass of water and then I come back and teach again. By the end of that 6 hours back to back, I don't know my own name, so I won't really be able to give you that much great advice. So what's going to be discussed on these discussion boards? Well, how many of you have actually looked at the discussion board so far and made some kind of comments? Well, what we've done is we've set it up slightly differently to some other courses. So we are going to start off, we've got a questions for faculty. That's kind of nice. So basically you can post questions there that you think might be of interest to other people. So if it's a time-sensitive or a personal question, don't post it on Blackboard because one, you don't want everyone knowing what the answer is, especially if it's a personal question. And two, if it's time-sensitive, we are not going to check that every day. But if it's a particular question that you think is related to a theory that other people might have misunderstood as well, post it there and we will check it and we will update and we will respond to everybody. There is a section that is for weekly discussions. So at the moment, there isn't one up there, but there will be by the time I get up to my office, and we'll post one for you. That's where you respond each week, where you make your original post, your comment on somebody else's, and you make it good. There's also a section that's called Articles of Interest. So I know you're all lovers of gerontology and lovers of psychology, and I know you're just like me. You're going to go home and you're going to read lots of articles, not even the ones I've given you, but ones that you just find interesting. But if you do find something, even a newspaper article that you think is really kind of interesting or might be interesting to other people, post it in that discussion board. It makes it a really living space for everybody in terms of our own educational input. So last time I did this, actually, I had some really good articles. Kelly posted a few really good ones and sent some to me as well. And I kind of learn a bit as well. It updates my learning because I can't read every journal that is ever published, especially with the amount that are published each and every month. We have the icebreaker. You know a little bit about me, you know a little bit about Kelly, we want to know about you. But similarly, it's a great way of introducing yourself to the other students here, but also to those students online. So you don't get any points for posting in the introduction section or by responding to anybody else's, but it is a really good way to try and get to know each other, especially if you decide that actually at one point you want to start a study group or you want to actually just talk to people online. And finally, we have a free discussion section. That is not monitored by Kelly and myself. That is where you can basically have it as like an online coffee group. You can have chats in there. You can talk about how amazing the class was. You can say about something you saw on Saturday Night Live, whatever you like, but just remember that it is part of the USC system, and if you say anything that is inappropriate, then it will be moderated and you could be subject to some ticking off. Okay? So in other words, don't badmouth Kelly and myself. Do that offline, yes. Do that actually in a real coffee shop. Okay, so as I said, the syllabus is available online. If you've got any questions about it, let me know and let Kelly know, and we'll hopefully answer things for you. I will let you know this now. Some of you might think it is unfair, but I think it is massively fair for everybody for parity purposes. You have got a long time to get your term paper in. The term paper is a big piece of work for everybody, but you have a lot of support. The deadline is there for a reason, like there are deadlines in the real world as well. For every 24 hours that you are late submitting your term paper, you will lose 10% off your final grade. Okay? You've been told this now, so you've got months to get this in, months to do this. It's not going to be an issue. If you are having health issues or you've got family issues, talk to us. If it is 3 minutes before the deadline and the power goes out in your building, that is not our problem. Okay, you have got months to submit this. Do not leave it till the last moment. Okay? I keep saying this, but there is no extra credit for this assignment, for this course even. This is one that I find interesting. I will happily let you all take as many notes as you like on your laptops. If you're old school like me, you can bring a notepad and paper. But if you want to do it on your laptops, that is fine. However, as you'll notice, there are cameras around you. They are recording for the online students, but they might also pick up if you are on chat instead, or you're playing Minesweeper, or you're playing, I don't know what other the games are, because I've never owned a games console or computer game in my life. If you're interested in any of that, that's fine, do it outside of class. Similarly, whilst I'm giving a lecture, there is absolutely no need for anybody to have their mobile telephones out. So I have one over here. So if there is a Trojan alert, so if there is, I don't know, a gunman on campus or we have an earthquake, I will get all of the alerts come through to my phone. I can let you all know. Nothing will happen in the hour and a half of each half of the lecture that requires you to have your mobile phone out at that particular point, okay? So I understand that you might have translation software. You can do that on your computers, no issue with that, but mobile phones are away. Because otherwise I have a habit of coming next to people and sitting down reading text messages to everybody with the microphones. Just a forewarning. So yeah, mobile phones are not permitted. So I'm here, I've got my phone, Kelly's got her phone, and the alerts will come through. So there you go, that's a quick question for you. No answers from anybody that's been in any of my classes so far, but what does the word plagiarism mean to you? Anybody?
Plagiarism means using someone else's work as your own. That could mean copying word for word what they said, or using their ideas as your own and not or failing to cite it properly.
Exactly. So essentially, it can be cutting and pasting, so using somebody else's words, but it can also be using their ideas and not giving them credit for it. So we all have great ideas, but if we start to use other people's ideas, we've got to actually give them some acknowledgement that it is not ours to start with. So there are many forms of plagiarism. I'm going to go over some of them now. We're going to leave some online for you in terms that you can reference to. But it is really important that you understand this. The consequences of plagiarizing are huge. So the best case scenario, if you plagiarize, you will get a 0 on the piece of work that you submit. The worst case scenario is you'll be asked to leave USC. Even in the best case scenario, if you get a 0, that will knock your GPA down to the point where you may either have to redo the class, or you have to take another class, or you do not graduate with your peers. Okay? Plagiarism isn't just resigned to essays. If you cut and paste something into a discussion board, that is plagiarism. If you cut and paste anything from my slides into an examination, into an online exam, even if we're looking at definitions, etc., that is plagiarism. That is plagiarizing me. That's even worse than plagiarizing anybody else. As an example for this, I was reading through a piece of work back in another institution I worked at, and I was like, this is really good, this section. They're doing an essay, and one section read completely different to the others, but read really well. I was like, but it seems a little familiar. They had cut and paste from a journal article that I had written. So obviously it was going to be good, but I did recognize it. So we have plagiarism software. We will find people that cheat. I'm not saying that any of you are, but the reason why I bring it up is because we can accidentally plagiarize. But also because I want you all to know that as you are going to be the ones that are doing your essays yourself, that the quality of your work is not going to be brought down by anybody else that plagiarizes. You are going to earn the grades that you earn, and everybody is going to earn them exactly the same. So when it comes to plagiarism, as I said before, there's things like cutting and pasting. That is the biggest of all no-nos, okay? So no Control-C and Control-Vs. So I've got here a definition of substance abuse, Okay? Don't worry necessarily about the definition. I've just put it there as an example. This is a World Health Organization definition of what substance abuse is. So, if I was to ask you in an examination, what is substance abuse? And you were then to say the harmful or hazardous use of psychoactive substances, including alcohol or illicit drugs, I would say no. The reason why I would say no is because that is cut and paste directly from that definition. Okay? What we want you to do is to demonstrate your knowledge, demonstrate your learning, put things into your own words. Okay? So, if you paraphrased by putting it into your own words, you show that you have knowledge, you show that you've understood the concepts, and you've shown that you can understand what we're asking. And that is essentially all we're trying to do for the exams. We're trying to make sure you've got a higher level of knowledge, of understanding. That's why we do the discussion boards each week and why we give you the papers to try and make sure that you have a really deep understanding of all of the topics. Because let's face it, 3 hours a week over about 12 weeks, because obviously with the different breaks that we have, that is not a huge amount of time to get all of the content that you need for a master's level. That's why we give you the readings to do outside of class. That's why we give you the discussion boards as well. Another way of doing it is you could actually put the reference. So you can put the section in quotations and then you can add a reference to the end. And I've got a little section that I'm going to briefly go over in a little bit about how we reference anyway. So other plagiarisms, do's and don'ts. So if in an exam I was to ask you what the 3 stages of learned helplessness are, they are the 3 stages of learned helplessness. There is no getting around that. There's no real way of writing perceived lack of control in any other way. So if I ask you for something that is 3 categories, something like that, you can write what they are because there's no other way of putting it. So if I asked you, what is the respiratory substrate of humans, you would say oxygen. That's what we use to breathe with, yeah? And I'm not going to ask you to try and find a different way of saying oxygen or to reference whoever came up with the word oxygen. Similarly, I'm not going to do so on this because there is no other way of answering that question. Because you can't put that into your own words. They are the words that they are, okay? The major no-no is teamwork. Yes, I want to encourage you to discuss things together, but you all have to do your own work, okay? This means for your assignments, this means for your summaries. So if everybody picks the same 2 articles, I'm going to think there's something a little fishy going on. There are a lot of articles to choose from. Similarly, and this happened not too long ago, in an exam, I had 2 people answer a short answer question with the same answer, including the same spelling mistake. So it was quite clear to me that they might have colluded. So make sure when you're doing your work, it doesn't benefit anybody. The exams that we have are all open book. Okay? You can have all of your notes. You've got the internet. There is no need to copy and paste. There is no need to copy from each other. There's no need to work together. I know you all want each other to do as well as possible, but the best way to do that is to form revision groups together, okay? And finally, well, I say finally, it's not finally at all. There's quite a few more slides to go. If you have to turn around to yourself and go, did I actually plagiarize that? The likelihood is you actually did, okay? So if you haven't, then there's not even going to be an inkling of doubt. But if you're like, is that plagiarism? Then you'll probably try and convince yourself, well, I didn't really plagiarize. I moved some of the words around. It's fine. It's my own ideas. No, that is still plagiarism and will still be picked up by the plagiarism software, okay? So if any of you who are not familiar with Turnitin, essentially every single journal article and every single assignment that every single student submits in every single university around the world is put into a global database. So you can't just cut and paste from anywhere because it will be found. So I've put this up there for you. This is a little bit of a massive diagram, and it ranges everything up through to mildly half-hearted plagiarism all the way up to we're going to cut your wrists off and you can't be doing any more again because it's not nice, So it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek diagram. Okay, so it's a little bit of a jokey diagram, but the message behind it is serious. So we want to maintain academic integrity. So you're all going to leave here with really good degrees, yeah? Yes. And you want to know that the quality of your degree will always be the best in the world, because USA Leonard Davis School of Gerontology is the best in the world. There's no arguing that fact. It is the best in the world. And the way that we stay the best in the world is because we have high levels of academic integrity. If people cheat and everybody else around the world knows that people cheat in our course, that makes the value of your degrees worthless. So what we do is we have a lot of policies in place to try and catch anybody that does cheat, because we want you to maintain that high level of academic integrity and for your degree to be the best in the world. Okay? So we're not doing it, we're not trying to catch anybody out, we're trying to make sure that the degree that you work for keeps its value around the world. So you go to speak to anyone in the field of gerontology and you tell them that you go to USC, that is automatic brownie points for you. And we want to make sure it stays that way. So we can avoid this. We can avoid this by referencing correctly and by doing paraphrasing and things like that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some types of referencing. So already on Blackboard, I put a short guide to APA referencing and a full guide to APA referencing. This gives you the styles that APA use, which is what we use in gerontology, to reference properly. Okay? I'm going to go over a few of them now. I'm going to go over them fairly quickly, but if you do have any questions, please stop me. So we have what we call in-text referencing. So this is in the main body of your assignments. So this is where you might have one person's idea. Say, for example, you want to reference me. You might say, Nash, 2016, or 2019, whatever year we're in, said that plagiarism is bad. And that's how you do that. You do Nash, you put the year, and say, said plagiarism is bad. Or you could say, plagiarism is really, 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 really bad, in brackets, Nash 2019. Okay? So this way you've got two ways of referencing in the text. If you have two authors, you should cite both of them. And this could be done if you're doing the first style, saying Nash and Mahnfeld both said that, that plagiarism is bad, you do it this way. And if you want to say plagiarism is really, really bad, Nash and Mahnfeld, then what you would do is put it this way. The key point, the key difference, because I'm a stickler for grammar and I'm a stickler for rules, if it's outside of the parentheses or the brackets, then you write it as a full word. If it's inside the brackets, then you write it as the and or ampersand sign. Okay? It might seem very pernickety, but the reason why I want to get you into this as a way of writing is that if you decide to write for a journal or you decide to go forwards in your academic careers, if you start to get this stuff right now, it comes as second nature. Because if you write for a journal and you haven't got their referencing style right, they'll just throw it out. They won't even look at the content. You could have had the world's best article, they just won't look at it because the referencing's wrong. If you've got 3, 4, or 5 authors, the first time that you should reference that, you should include all of them. And thereafter, you use et al. That just means and others. And here, similarly, what we need to make sure is that we're putting full stops and commas in the right places. Similarly to, say here, for example, you put one after the last name, but before the ampersand as well. So you've got to make sure you're using the correct formations of reference skills. Okay? If you've got 6 or more, you don't have to list them all. Okay? You can just put et al. From the first time you do this. And just again, just those examples. There are going to be different types of references that you are going to include in your reference section. Okay? Oh, sorry, before we do that. So if you're going to cite a secondary reference source, so for example, Kelly comes up with a fabulous idea, I like her idea, and I write it in a paper myself, you can't just cite Kelly's paper if you've read mine and not hers. So what you would do is you'd say Mahnfeld 2016 as cited in Nash 2019. Okay? So it's basically a way of just saying what you've read is Kelly's work, but it is in my paper.
Could you say that one more time?
Yeah. No problem. Right, so,
Could you just say that one more time? Because I feel like that happens a lot when you are doing research.
yes. Okay, so you're reading an article. So I'm writing an article. I've written an article that you're reading, okay? And in that article, I'm using work that Kelly has written, okay? But you don't go and read Kelly's article. You just take her idea from my paper. You say, well, it's Kelly's idea as cited in Nash, okay? So you cite her work as cited in, there you go, as cited in the paper that you've actually read. Does that make sense? So what you're doing there is you're giving both of us credit. So you're crediting Kelly's idea, but the fact that it was you read it in my paper, okay? And it's actually really important because a few times what will happen is you'll get some people go, I'm going to pretend I've read Kelly's paper. And you'll find it's actually only available in, I don't know, Latin or something. And then you say, have you read that paper? And they'll be like, yes. And I've got a copy of it and go on, then read it for me. So there's no problem with saying, actually, I've read about this person's work in another person's paper. No problem with that. Just be honest about it, okay? You can also cite websites. So again, so if you've read something on the American Psychological Association or on the Gerontological Society of America or different websites, government websites, just be careful of the type of websites that you are citing. So make sure they're actually of a good, reputable status. I'm going to skip over this part because I shouldn't have put it on there, so we won't leave it there. In the reference section, this is the reference section at the back. Okay, so here we've got different referencing styles. We need to make sure that we're putting, for example, in the year of publication, not the year of printing. We need to make sure that they are double line spaced in the references. We need to make sure that if we are putting a book in there and we're putting the edition number, we only put the edition number if it's more than the second edition, if it's the second edition or more. So if you're citing textbooks, for example, but try not to. Everything you can find in a textbook, you can find in a journal article. Are you all happy with using the online article searches? Anybody? Anybody happy with that? Nobody? Okay, use it. Have a practice. Do it before you need to. If you need additional assistance, the library has got skills workshops set up for that. I think there is one on the 20-something of September, I think it's the 24th of September or something like that, where you can actually have additional skill sessions there. It's really important you know how to do this stuff. So in the reference section...
I have it right here, Paul. It's September 16, organizing your research with EndNote online. That's one thing. The next one is with RefWorks, which is one that I use if people are familiar with that. So if you're like on the USC library page and you're looking at something, you can actually save it to RefWorks. So it will go into an automatic bibliography for you. And you can sign up for RefWorks as a student at USC, and it's super useful. But these are in the Gero lounge. Kelsey's got some of these. There's some guides for the research librarians across campus are doing various workshops this semester, including I think one on using Twitter, to do some research. So anyway, interesting articles, and you can come to me and I can give this to you as well.
Fabulous, thank you. So the reference section, if you're going to use books, I'm going to put a few examples up there for you. Essentially what you need to do is make sure you give the authors the same way as you would do previously. If you're doing a book, then you need to make sure that the title of the book is either italicized or underlined, and you need to give the place of publication. That's then exactly the same if you've got two or more authors, exactly the same as before. If you're looking at official publications, you can use these as you would do referencing a website. So for example, you might have an official publication by the Department of Health as an example, where it doesn't give you an author. You can use the Department of Health as that reference name, but everything else needs to be the same. So you need to put the title of that report in italics or underlined, and then say where you got that from. The same as any online publications, where you'll need to provide a web link to the paper that you have read. For journal articles, these are the ones you're going to need to look at more and more, because this is where you should be getting the majority of your data from. Here you need to do exactly the same as before by listing all of the authors in the formats shown. And then when you're giving the journal should be either italicized or underlined, okay? These are all given to you in the referencing guides I've put online, so don't panic if you're not quite remembering all of these details at the moment. Similarly, if you've got an online journal article, what you need to do is give us what they call the DOI. This basically is a reference number that allows us to track down any article online. That DOI is a permanent number and will never change, and every article has a totally unique number, okay? If you're going to do a website, then you need to give us the website and the date that you have accessed that, because websites change. Okay, so if you've got something on there, so obviously it's not going to hopefully change in the time that you're writing it, but it will mean that theoretically we could go back to Webmaster in a couple of years' time and still get that same information. Yeah. Okay, I know that's a lot of information about plagiarism and about referencing. Do you have any questions? Bearing in mind, at the moment, all of that information is available on the 2-page and the full page guide that I've put online for you, okay? As well as having links through USC Gero to the APA format referencing styles. Any questions about what might be constituted plagiarism? Because we've given you this warning now, that means that there is a zero tolerance going forwards. Okay, no questions? No questions about the exams or anything else like that? Fabulous. Okay, this is what I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to give you some things. So I've mentioned to you before that I can try and change the syllabus around a little bit to cover what you want. But what is it that you want to get out of Gero 520? Why have you chosen to do this now? I know that you have to really do 520 at some point, but why have you chosen to do it now? What is it that you want to get out of this course?
It's my first semester in the MSG program, and I
Welcome.
don't. Thank you. I don't have a background in psychology yet, and I figured this is a pretty big basis for gerontology in general, so I just wanted to start it quickly.
Totally agree. Psychology is a foundation for everything. It's the foundation for sociology. It's the foundation for biology. We cover everything because we're a massively amazing science. And yes, psychology is a science. Anything else? Anything else that anybody else wants to get from the course?
I have a question. So I am interested in like the cognitive why like we think the way or why people think the way they do. Is that what psychology is? Is the study of why we think the way we do or
Partly.
how we think?
Partly. So we're going to be looking at perceptions. So we're going to be looking at perceptions as we age. So how these perceptions, how we interact with the world, how that can change across the life course. We're going to be looking at things like decision-making, how that changes across the life course. Are you going to be more of a risk taker as an older person or as a younger person? What about your driving and your cognitive processing? How does that change as we age? All of that is going to be covered, and it's going to be covered in style.
Is psychology and cognition, can they be used as synonyms?
No.
Okay.
So psychology, like gerontology, is a multidisciplinary science. So there is cognitive psychology, which looks at brain processing. There's also social psychology, which is how we interact with the world. There's biological psychology, which looks very much at the human physiology. We have abnormal psychology, which looks at every aspect that just seems to when things go wrong. We have environmental psychology, which looks at the lived and built environments, and it goes on and on and on. So cognition is just one part of psychology.
Thank you. You answered my question.
Fabulous. I like when I can answer questions. I'm sure you probably like it when I can answer questions too. But I will also be very honest with you. If you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I'm not going to give you, excuse my language, but I'm not going to give you BS up here. I will tell you I do not know, and I will find the answer out for you, okay? Because you are all intelligent people. That's why you're at USC and why you're not at UCLA. So if you've got questions, it might be a question that I don't know the answer to. But I will be very honest with you. And I expect the same from yourself. I expect, oh, there you go, that's the noise. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello, welcome to Gero 520. Hopefully you're calling for the right course.
Yes. I was actually going to make a comment on the question that you have posted on the board right now.
Ooh. Please do. Do you want to introduce yourself to the rest of the class?
Okay. My name is Sierra Travis. I currently reside in North Carolina. And what I hope to learn from Gero 520 is everything. This is my first year, so I'm currently undecided on how I want to blend my gerontology degree with my bachelor's in social work. So I'm kind of wanting to get a feel of everything so I can know what is out there for me to do.
We can certainly aim to help you with that one. So what was your question?
Okay, so my question was, in this class, I see that it's called Lifespan of Developmental Psychology. So I wanted to know, basically, with that being the title of the class, what is the primary focus just going to be psychology with aging?
Yes, so it's lifespan developmental psychology. So we're going to be looking at how your psychology changes and adapts across the lifespan. So from being a child, how you develop all the way through to later life. But the course
Okay,
itself
so
is
from
just
birth to
psychology.
later life. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, that was my question. It's nice meeting everyone, and I hope everyone enjoys the class.
Well, it's lovely to hear from you. And anytime you want to chat, anytime you want to tell us what you're eating or whatever else, feel free to give us a call and we'll all have a bit of a chin wag in the class.
All right, thank you.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
All right.
There we go. So that is the Stranger Things noise that I was telling you about that just comes over the speakers every now and again. Okay? And it's always nice to interact with online students. Okay, so that's basically Gero 520. As I said, if there's anything that you want out of it, then that's great, let us know. But I'm going to get Kelly to run around in a second now because I'm going to tell you what I want from 520. I want to challenge you. I want to make you feel uncomfortable at times, and I want you to really think. We're going to bust some myths. I'm going to get you to really think about your own misconceptions at times around aging. So what aging really means, or how many stereotypes do we actually hold about older adults? So I've got a few questions for you. Most older adults will suffer with dementia. Yes, no, maybe. Put your hands up and we'll throw some mic. Actually, no, we're not going to we'll do that. We'll just get you to shout out because you're feeling really energetic. I can see it in your eyes. It's just dead eyes staring back at me at the moment. So yes, no, or maybe. All those for yes, say hello. 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 All those for no. No. Okay, so we've got one person that thinks yes and one person that thinks no. We've got a bit of volume here. Come for some volume. I'm shouting, so you can shout too. Okay, well, we'll start off. I'll give you this one, then we'll play the game for the next one. Actually, no. Most older adults will not have dementia in later life. Okay, so there's two things I hate about that sentence. Most older adults and suffer. So dementia is a disease like any other. If that person is suffering with dementia, then we're not doing something right. It is perfectly possible to live well with dementia. So if somebody is suffering, we're doing something wrong. Similarly, as I said, most older adults, about 40% of those people over the age of 80 will have dementia, but only about 6% of those over the age of 65. So the majority of older adults across the whole of their life course will not be living with any form of dementia. Yes, there might be some cognitive impairment, some memory impairment, as we'll learn in future weeks, which are natural parts of the aging process. But dementia itself is a disease, and not every older person, in fact, the majority of older adults will not have one of those diseases. Okay, the average older adult is either uninterested in or physically unable to have sex. There you go, think of old people having sex. So do you think old people want to have sex? Yes. Anybody think no, they don't? One person thinks older people don't want to have sex. Well, kind of actually depends on the person. So if you've wanted sex all of your life, you're going to carry on wanting it as an older adult. So basically, with regards to aging, aging is not a factor that will make you want to have less sex. So in a big old study that was done, actually they find that of those people who are in dyadic relationships of two people, they've actually said that every single person in those relationships, in those studies, every single person said that physical intimacy was important for the maintenance of the quality of their relationship. And we can see this when we also see actually the number of people with HIV in the over 50s group is the largest percentage growing of any other age group. When we're looking at the number of STIs, actually it's the people over the age of 50 who are seeing the largest percentage increases. That's because they think, well, actually, I've gone through the menopause, I'm not going to get pregnant, don't need safe sex. Or they're in residential care homes and everyone's enjoying each other's company and it's going around like wildfire. So I know this, so I was part of a study we did back in Wales. We actually had a big bowl of condoms that we put onto a table in the middle of a hallway so people could just walk past. The residential care manager's like, why are we doing this? I said, just humorous. I said, no one's going to use this. By the end of the first week, we had a phone call to go back and replenish them. And you know what? I would quite happily have gone back every single day with 1,000 if it meant that those people were actually getting what they needed safely. Because if we're going to talk about this in future weeks, but think about it logistically. If you are living with some form of physical impairment and you can't get to buy these things, or you can't go to a sexual health clinic, etc., what are you going to do? We don't target this information for older adults because as a society we're ageist and make the assumption that they don't want to have sex. As you can see, one of my major areas is around sex in older adults as well. Older adults experience a higher instance of depression. What do you reckon? More older people are depressed than younger people? Yes, we think more older people are depressed. Anybody think no? Hands up for no. A couple of people have got a smattering of no. Yes and no. Well, actually, what we find is that age is not a predictor of depression either. We find that as we age, older adults might have a higher incidence of reactive depression, i.e. at the death of a spouse, death of a friend, etc., because they're experiencing more of these events, but these are short-lived. When we're actually looking at global depression episodes, we find actually it's usually men in their late 20s, early 30s who are more likely to be depressed, okay? So, sorry guys, it's a little bit against you, but what we find is that actually in age, it's not a predictor for depression. It's ineffective to change bad habits in later life. So there's no point in telling somebody at the age of 70 that they should stop smoking because it's going to give them no benefits. And there's no point in telling people that they should start walking more in later life because it's going to have no benefits. No, exactly the same. You can, as we'd say, you can teach an old dog new tricks. So we can get people. The difference is we've actually got to look at something we call quality of life. So the example I give here, and Kelly has heard this one before, is my grandmother before she passed away. She used to like, she used to like a little bit of bread with her butter. She would slice butter like it was cheese. And she would lie full fat, full salt butter over her bread. She was in her early 90s at this point. She died when she was 93. And the doctor turned around to her and said, you really need to stop eating butter like this. It's going to cause you to die prematurely. She was like, I'm 93. When am I exactly going to die because of this? So she got a lot of enjoyment out of eating that butter. So what was the health benefit in really saying, stop, do this? The quality of her life was such that she really did enjoy this. And whenever I used to go around as a child, around to her house, I used to enjoy it too. I used to enjoy it on a regular basis. There was a lot more health benefit in me stopping doing it than there ever was her. And we have to make these decisions. So we've got to make these decisions around quality of life, and that's where we have to look at things as critical gerontologists from a holistic perspective. Older adults prefer to disengage from the community that they're in because they want to spend more time on their own. Got one no. Anybody think yes? More older adults prefer to spend time more on their own. No, exactly. It depends on the person as they age. So, for example, as an age category, age doesn't actually predict whether you want to spend time on your own. As you can tell by listening to me, I'm quite shy, I'm very retiring, I don't have very many friends, and I don't speak very well. So I like time on my own. I like to read books on my own. And as I age, I'm likely to want to do the same. Kelly, complete opposite, complete party animal. You'll see her out every Friday and Saturday night, and she's going to do the same when she's in her 70s and 80s and 90s. So what we find is that actually you want to continue in the same sort of vein that you are. What we find is that actually, as the theory of disengagement was brought around, that was actually reflecting more structural limitations. So for example, you might not go out because you can't hear so well and you don't want to be in crowded, noisy environments. You might not be able to walk as well or see as well, so you don't go out to group events. What we find is that these functional limitations often cause people to disengage, and at that point we need to start to implement things that we'll discuss next week in trying to challenge these limitations. Ooh, got twice in one session. Hello.
Hi, is this the gerontology classroom?
It is indeed. This is Gero 520. Welcome. Can you introduce yourself to the class?
Yes, hi. This is, my name is Elise Collins, and I live in San Francisco Bay Area.
Ooh, very pretty.
Yeah, I'm a yoga teacher, and I'm interested in how yoga lifestyle can help with healthy aging.
Okay. Well, we actually do that later on in the syllabus. We talk about exercise, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about yoga and Tai Chi and music as well. So we'll talk about the impact that has on our psychology, on our cognition, but also on our physiology. So what that can do to our heart rates, our stress rates, etc., etc. So I promise you we will definitely cover that. And if I haven't, please feel free to phone back anytime and virtually slap my wrist for forgetting about it.
Okay, I just wanted to add that I live with my parents, and I know there's a little bit of a delay, but I just wanted to comment that my dad likes to read, and he's more quiet. He's 90, but he also goes to work every day.
Yep.
And my mom is very active in fundraising. She's a retired judge, and she's active in fundraising for international opera stars, and she's a party animal. She just had a party the other night.
Fantastic. Well, if she is ever holding another party and she wants some guests from Los Angeles, please let us know.
Well, you're on the guest list.
Fabulous. I will hold you to that.
Okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for calling in. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Okay, actually, this pretty much answers our next question. Generally, all older adults are alike. They're homogeneous. False, exactly. So I'm going to use a bit of analogy here, and this is one I've used before. So sorry, Kelly. And also I'm going to point this out. This is only an analogy. This is not something that I do, okay? So if you have a small child, you poke the small child, it cries. Every small child, if you did this to 100 small children, they will cry. If you did the same, you kick them, they're going to cry. They're stimulus and response. That's all children do. As they age, they generally do the similar things because they want to fit in with their friends. They want to choose the same courses as their friends. They want to go to the same places as their friends. But as we age, we make decisions that differentiate ourselves from each other, yeah? So you've all chosen to come to the best school in the world. You haven't decided to go to UCLA. So we've all made these decisions that differentiate ourselves. So how many people here decided to skip breakfast this morning? One person, two people. How many people have decided that this weekend they're going to go away on holiday for Labor Day weekend? There you go, one person. We're making decisions that differentiate ourselves. And as we get older, as we go through the life course, we actually make more and more decisions that make ourselves different from other people, different life trajectories. So my argument would be actually older people are the least homogeneous group. So when we actually refer to people as older people and we lump together everybody over the age of 50 or over the age of 65, that's a little bit problematic, really. Okay? So losing memory is expected as you age. Yes and no. It's yes and no. It's what we call a beige answer. So memory loss is not predictable as part of the aging process. However, we do see some decline linked to aging, standard aging, and it's also more likely as we age that we are going to be living with something like dementia as well. So how many people here have ever lost their glasses only to have them on the top of their head? How many people here have ever been walking around their house looking for their car keys only to realize they've got them in their hand or their pocket? And how many people, if you're lucky enough in Los Angeles to have stairs, have ever gone upstairs and then forgotten what you've gone upstairs for? And how many people here have put that down to old age or dementia? One person. Generally, what we see is that as younger people, we don't do that. We don't think, oh, no, what, I'm getting dementia, I've forgotten where this is. But you can have the same experience as an older person and go, well, I'm just getting old, or I'm having a senior moment, or I've got dementia. When in actual fact, you've got the same lifestyle pressures, you've got the same bills to pay, you've got the same family squabbles happening. You've still got to be able to plan when you're going to watch Orange is the New Black because it's nearly finished, it's nearly over now, and you've still not caught up. So you've still got these life pressures. Okay? But we put it down to aging just because we as a society and ourselves individually are ageist. Okay? That's something we are going to come back to, and I will preach to the high heavens when we come to our ageism section. Older adults should have decisions made for them due to decreased capacity. So do we think we should make decisions for older people? Yes, we should. Every person at the age of 50 should turn over their rights to make any decisions for themselves. They should have all of their care decisions made for them. No. So essentially what we say is that there's a little bit of a phrase about this, and we are going to discuss this when we look at the ethics of aging, is nothing about us without us, whereby older people should be included in every decision that is made about their life. So when it's about, should we go into care, it shouldn't be the family's decision. If a new drug should be started, it should be the older person that is making those decisions, okay? So what we're saying is that unless somebody has impaired capacity where they've got a legal guardian acting on their behalf, they should be able to make all decisions themselves. The majority of older adults in the US are supported in residential or nursing care facilities. No? Anybody think that most old people are supported in residential care? Most older people couldn't afford to be, even if they wanted to be. It's expensive here. Why is this not coming up? Or have I turned it off? No, I haven't. There we go. Only about 3% of the people over the age of 65 in America are currently living in long-term care, and about 80% are living totally independently on their own or just with their spouse. Okay? So the majority of older adults are living independently. They're not incapable. They're not living with dementia. They're not every stereotype we have of an older person. Older people are just as active as you and I. So again, a prime example, my mother is 65. She still works full-time. She has a 2-story house which she manages on her own. She's got more of a social life than I do, and she also has my brand new car. So what are the take-home messages from this? We are going to challenge you. We are going to get you to think. This is not going to be a course that you come in and sit down, sit here for 3 hours and then go away. I am going to make you think. I'm going to make you engage whether you like it or not. It's going to be interactive. I'm going to give you lots of resources, including the lecture materials, to scaffold your learning, and we're going to try and make sure you get as much out of this as possible. But the only way that's going to happen is if this is a two-way street. So you tell me what you want, you ask questions from me, I will give you the answers, I will give you the information that you so crave. Because both Kelly and I are approachable. So you can come and see us. You can make appointments. You can just drop in. You can even say hello if you were to see us in town on a Saturday afternoon shopping for groceries. So, any other questions that you've got at the moment? So nothing, oh, we got one. Go for it.
I don't know if I missed this, but our discussion content on exams.
So the discussions are based on the content from the lectures. So yes, I won't be saying specifically what is this, what was said in week 4, but the content. So the whole point is about understanding concepts. So the lecture will introduce the concepts, the readings will expand those concepts, the discussion boards will get you to think about those concepts, and the exams will check that you understand that.
Thank you.
No problem. See, there's coherence to this whole model that we've planned. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a break. It is 2:30 now. We finish at 4 o'clock in theory. We will probably finish before that, but I will give you until the clock at the back says 2:40, and then we will get started on a little bit of research in aging. So we'll be looking at some demography. Okay, so you've got 10 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm nothing if not punctual, and it is 2:40 now. So we're going to get back to it. We're going to start with a little bit around the drivers of population change. So has anybody studied anything around demography before? Anybody done anything in demography? A little bit? Okay. Well, it's the fundamentals of gerontology, essentially, because what we're looking at is how or when the population ages and what that really means. We're going to be looking at population pyramids. Anybody ever come across population pyramids before? Yes. There you go, one person. Fabulous. I'm going to ask you all the questions about them. We're going to talk a little bit about lifespan developmental theory, as well as looking a little bit about research and research methodologies and design, okay? So we're going to get all of this done, and we're going to get it all done before 4 o'clock because I want to get my hair cut. Okay, so as you can see, there are different structures to these population pyramids, and we've got some historical data here. So back in the 1900s, we can see that we've got a standard, what would almost be called a pyramid shape. So we can find that there's not very many people who are alive, either male or female, in later life, especially when you look at those people, say, over the age of 65, from there up. Very small numbers, really, in terms of the population. And there's lots and lots and lots of people being born. And what we can see is the differences between 0 to 4 and up to even 30, we can see that there's actually quite a lot of people that are dying off. So we can see there are changes in the numbers of people who are alive at any given point at different ages of different genders. Push forwards 40 years, and what we see is that there are larger numbers of people surviving up to later life, as well as who are actually living into their adulthood. So what sorts of things might drive this change? It's absolutely fine. I'll come sit next to you. We'll sit down here.
Medical advancements.
Medical advancements, yeah. That's a really big one. And that's one that we'll often see in terms of the demographic transition that we'll discuss later on. So here we're looking at reducing infant mortality. So this could be the increase in inoculations, vaccinations. It can also be down to general better knowledge around health. And one of the other things we're going to talk about later on in the course is something called health literacy. So that's your knowledge of health. Anything else that might drive that other than better health care?
I think people generally have better awareness for what they eat and daily life, exercise more, and all the gluten-free stuff.
Yeah.
Low sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. So we're looking at how we can live a healthy lifestyle. So it's our activities of daily living, knowing that we've got to exercise, but also knowing what we should and shouldn't eat. So we're very much more aware of our lifestyle factors. Yeah, very much so. Anything else? Go for it.
Maybe legal protections surrounding workers' rights and welfare and that type of thing changing over the years?
Yeah, very much so. So the legal rights and protections, that can include things like the welfare state. So things like state pensions, as well as Medicare, Medicaid, for example, coming in and actually providing that little bit more support. Anything else? How many people this morning urinated into a pot and threw it out the window? Not very many people, thankfully. Most people use a bathroom, flushable toilets. We're talking about sanitation. That was one of the major changes that occurred in westernized societies, and obviously then went through the world, in terms of actually saying, well, you know what? It's probably healthier to move all of this stuff that we know is bad for us and that we get out of our bodies away. So things like sanitation. We've also got the Industrial Revolution, when we started to get things making our lives easier. So we no longer have to get up and actually change the channel on the TV. We can just point and click, and that's so much better for us. So there are lots of different things. So we've got to think about how population changes in terms of the real world. So it's not just looking at these shifts, we're seeing what these drivers actually are. So if we look at this and look at the US data from 2016, what we see is actually we've got less people being born now. Okay, that isn't to say that the death rate of kids is going up, saying actually people are choosing to have less children. So what we're finding as this goes up, if this continues to be a trend, there's going to be more people at the top than are actually in the working population. Because as we can see, from the ages of 60, 65 going up, we've actually got a lot more people, especially women, who are living in these age categories. So we've got burgeoning middle at the moment, which is going to continue to rise. And when we look at that in terms of projections for 2050, oh no, I haven't got that one there. Sorry. If we look at that for projections for 2050, we'll see actually the population pyramid becomes much more top heavy. So we find that there are lots more people living over the age of 65, and we see a higher what we call a dependency ratio. So number of people who are either younger than the age of 15 that can't work or over the age of 65 who don't have to work than those people who are in the economically active age groups. That's because less people are being born and more people are living into later life. So when we're looking at these changes and we're looking at these changes longitudinally, over 100 years what we can see is everything we've just discussed. So we're seeing more people are surviving to their first birthday. So infant mortality is going down. We're better in terms of vaccinating children, in terms of keeping them away from childhood diseases like things like diphtheria, for example. We've also got more people living into later life, so 65, 75, 85 and beyond. So we see that now 35% of the population are expected to live over the age of 85, which is quite a huge proportion when considering at the start of the century it was only 6%. We find again that there's that increase, but that increase in life expectancy is much more dedicated, should I say, to females rather than men. Why do we think that might be? Why do we think women live longer than men?
I read something about males live more risky behaviorally wise.
Okay.
So that's a theory.
Yeah, you might argue that men live and take part of more risky behaviors. You might see that in terms of, well, actually there's a piece published the other day that actually said about the number of sexual partners that people have. Men have more sexual partners across their life course than women do. I'm not quite sure how that works because obviously some of the women are going to have to, but anyway. So what else might it be other than risky behaviors?
Like probably because the female compared to men, they might have a more positive attitude towards like social activities, so they would like to discuss about their pressure with their friends, share their, some kind of psychological burden.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we're going to discuss later on in the course when we're looking at social isolation and loneliness later in life. Women generally have larger social networks. Men's social networks are generally derived by the workplace. So when they retire, their social networks basically crumble and collapse. So we find that women generally have that better social support network. And we know that if you are socially isolated or lonely, it's actually more dangerous in later life than smoking 15 cigarettes a day for your mortality. So that's a major one. Yeah? And obviously, you know that women don't work as hard as men, so men are under more stress throughout their life anyway. So there are lots of different reasons. Also, we've got the biology as well. There are differences in genetics, which are at least partially to explain this. And that's why we're going to look later on in the course at what we call the diathesis stress model, which is your predisposition. So we're looking at genetic predisposition and combining that with our environmental trigger causes. So, what do these really mean? Well, they're enabling us to understand the drivers for demographic transition. So as countries develop, populations change. So when we're looking at these population pyramids, we see that they're in different shapes based on the country and based on the development stage that that country's in. And that's that demographic transition, the transition to different stages of population status and population, what's the word I'm looking for? That'll do. That'll do nicely. Population spread. Okay, so we have got different drivers for these, and we're going to discuss what these drivers. There are actually 4 drivers for population change, and I'm going to get you to think about those in a minute. We're also going to look at the global perspective. So there are different things that drive population change where you are in the world. And then we're going to look again at those population pyramids and discuss the demographic transition theory. And we're going to get all that done soon. So, what do you think are the drivers for population change? There's 4. If I give you what I'm going to see, I might regret doing this because I'm not sure if I animated them individually or together. Okay, so we've got increases, births and immigration. Okay, so these are what increase a population within a country. Okay, the number of people that are born in that country and the number of people that go into that country. Make sense? Yeah. What might be the cause a population to decrease? Run up there.
Sorry for causing you to do extra steps.
I know, sorry. I can have that extra cake later on.
I think war, violence, causing the population to shrink because people are trying to obviously get out of there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got all of the things. So what is it called when somebody leaves a country?
I feel like I should know this. Decrement?
We've got immigration there. It's emigration when they leave the country, and that might be caused from war. And what happens when there's loads of people in a war? What happens to a lot of those people that are in the war? They die. So exactly the opposite to there. So we've got the increases, which are births and immigration, thank you very much. And then we have the decrements, which are death and emigration. So inward migration is an increase, outward migration is a decrease. So we've got a lovely little equation, which is P1, so population change, is population original number plus births minus deaths plus immigration minus emigration. It is not a complicated equation. It's nothing you have to really rack your head around. Just remember that births increase a population, deaths decrease a population. Inward migration increases a population, outward migration decreases a population. It is not science of the rocket variety. It's common sense. So we want you just to think about that in terms of the population levels. And what we look at is aging at the aggregate level. So when we're looking at the overall population, what are the population means in terms of their ages? And what we find, especially countries that have high levels of inward migration, actually have lower population ages because it's generally younger people who migrate into a country. Okay? And when more countries are experiencing higher levels of emigration, it tends to be their younger people who are leaving and the older people remain. Okay? So, what are some of the common measurements? Well, what we tend to look at is the proportion of people. So the percentage of people at different ages within a population. And this gives us an an idea of what we call structural aging. And that's something I've got a little bit of a diagram for you later on. But structural aging is when I think it's 30% of the population is over the age of 65. Don't write that one down at the moment because I've got it on the next slide. We also look at absolute aging. So this is the number, the actual physical number of people over the age of a particular age. We also look at the median ages, so we're looking at average ages. And we look at life expectancy. And here we look at 2 different factors. We look at overall life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. So these are the years that you can expect to live without considerable impact of disease or ill health, and then your overall life expectancy. And then as a society and demographers, you've seen these charts that show what the expected life expectancy is in like 50 years' time. We do this from projections based on these immigration, emigration, based on health statistics, and based on the way that we're making technological advancements in each of these countries. And what we do is we display these in these population pyramids. So I'm going to display a little bit more for you now. So what we see here, and the reason why I put this up is to give you a little bit of historical context. So we've got those people are the percentage of a population who are over the age of 60. So we've got between 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, 30 or over. Okay? So as you can see from this, what we call structural aging are those countries that have got 30% or more of their population over the age of 60. Okay? That's when a country is seen to be going through structural aging. Okay? That's an important concept. It is likely to be a question on your midterm. Okay? Just as a hint. I'll give a few hints like that most weeks. Yes. Yeah, no problem. A country that has got 30% or more of its population over the age of 60 is said to be going through structural aging. Okay? And as we'll see here, back in 2009, not very much of the world had anything anywhere near that, to be honest with you. The one that was closest to it at that time was Japan, because they have the longest life expectancy anywhere in the world. What we'll see from 2050 is that actually much of what we call the global north will be going through structural aging. So Canada especially, and across most of Europe. North America, not so much so. Why might North America not be going through structural aging the same as other countries in the global north might be?
Healthcare not being as good as the other countries?
Healthcare not being as accessible as the other
Yes.
countries. So the healthcare isn't bad if you can afford it over here. So for me, for example, at the moment, because I still pay taxes in the UK and over here, that's why I'm poor, it's better for me, more cost effective, if I break my arm, to book a flight to London, go and use the NHS and then fly back, than it is for me to pay excesses in my health insurance over here. Okay? Seems ridiculous. And when we look at diseases that don't need to cause death, so for example, the US has the highest prevalence rate of AIDS, not HIV, but AIDS, than any other developed country where the treatments are available. Okay? So we can treat things, but we just can't afford to buy them in the US. And that's one of the reasons why the US is going to slow down in terms of structural aging, as well as because of people like me. I am a migrant. As I said before, I'm originally from the UK. I came across, I'm not quite 60 yet, so I bring down the average age a little bit. And we find there's many more people coming into the US and those opportunities. So there are different reasons, but I always bring up healthcare because I like to bash the US healthcare system because the NHS, rock on, National Health Service in the UK, the idea of it at least is very good. And Canada has it, and it works in Canada. It works much better in Canada than it does in the UK. Anyway, so what we also look at is some global statistics on life expectancy. So we talked about this, where we can expect to live the best. So this is a couple of years old now. So Japan, for example, their life expectancy now is around about 84 years of age. The UK's life expectancy is now about 83. Greece is around 80. China has increased slightly to about 75. And what we can do is we can actually see those areas of the world which we'd call lower human development, medium human development, and high human development, based on global indices of development. There's one country that's really missing from there. What do you think it is? Where do you think it is? What do you think the life expectancy, without Googling it, what do you think the life expectancy is in the US? 60? Anybody, are we going higher or lower? 74? Anything else? Well, you undersell yourselves a little bit. It used to be, when this chart was done, it used to be about 75, 76. It's now up to about 78 and a smidge. Okay? So you're creeping into that high human development, but the main reason why is around healthcare. You could also argue that it's also down to the very long working weeks and very little amount of annual leave, very little leave that you give to women, i.e. 0 for maternity leave, the sick leave that you don't get either, all these other aspects around working lives. And you can also have it down to massive wealth disparity. So what do you think the average income is in Los Angeles? In America, sorry. Actually, no, go for Los Angeles. What do you think the average salary is in Los Angeles? Anybody got an idea? $2,500? No, a year. No, that's fine. It's what do you reckon? So what would it be? So what would 2,500 be? So 25 for 40 something. So you're looking around. You're thinking about 50,000 as the average salary. If you're thinking 2,500 a month. Is that 40,000? Anybody want to go higher than that? Anybody want to go lower than that? About 30K? It is depressing. So the average salary in Los Angeles, there are a few different figures around it, but it's about $34,000 a year. Yet, if you're on $34,000 a year, there is absolutely no way you are ever going to have housing in Los Angeles. There's no way you're ever going to be able to buy anywhere in Los Angeles, let alone run a car or even use public transportation. What do you think is the average, or what do you think is the sustainable salary that people say there should be a household income in Los Angeles? Yeah, usually it's the average is the nuclear family, 2 adults, 2 kids. About that. They say between 95 to 100,000 should be your household income. It usually figures around about 94,000, 95,000 is what they say you should have as a household income. Yet, what we're looking at actually is that most of those households that are then surveyed, when we're looking at this data, are people that already own their own homes because they bought many years ago before house prices went up, or these people that have got multiple incomes within one household. So, okay, the average salary might be low, but they've got multiple people bringing in those salaries because you've got multi-generational households. So what we find actually, if you're looking as a person to live alone in Los Angeles that needs to have a relatively good standard of living, you're probably looking at between 80 to 90,000 anyway. Okay? It is a very expensive place to live. But when you're looking at averages, averages don't always tell you the whole story. That's why it's really important when we're even looking at life expectancy to understand that averages don't tell us everything, okay? That's why I kind of give you that bit of narrative, is just to understand that when we're looking at statistics, statistics can be used to tell you many different stories, okay? Okay, so when we're looking at life expectancy, what we can see is that life expectancy in 2015 was relatively good. So we're looking at, again, that difference between the global north. And believe it or not, Australia falls into the global north category. You could argue that it's still a protectorate of the United Kingdom, so that's why, but I'm not going to say anything there. But what we're saying is we've got developed areas in the north, which is basically the areas where we're seeing a living higher life expectancies. And we see these differences in changes. So we've got here different graphs that are showing different changes. So, for example, we're missing certain data. So this is the crude mortality and birth rates in Mauritius. Okay, this shows us the number of people that were dying is decreasing. We also see that the birth rate is also decreasing. So these are the kinds of figures that we see from around the world that give us that information about how populations are changing. But we see a gap. What might cause gaps? Anybody know the history of Mauritius? Go for it.
Not really, but it's related to India, more or less, the history in the 20th century. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
It's to do with their history, obviously. Yeah, what we've got here is civil war, essentially. So what we've got is we will see that there'll be demographic data that is missing. For example, around World War I, around World War II, around countries that were involved in that. We see issues that are probably going to be lots of years of missing data around Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq. What about in Mauritius? We see the same. So what we've got is a really rich data source. It's not just the data is there, and we can make inferences around why those were, but also the data that's not there. What might have caused those demographic shifts? So what we're saying is when we're looking at the number of people that are born, the number of people that die, when we're looking at when we're looking at population rates, we can see all of these have got multiple things that can cause them to vary. And when we're looking at these charts, they give us a lot more information than we initially first think. There's a great website called Gapminder. I've given you the link there. You can go on to it at any point that isn't during this lecture. And you'll be able to see interactive charts that talk about income levels around the world. They talk about demographic transitions around the world. And they map them over the last 100+ years. So you can see where different countries fall in terms of life expectancy, in terms of income and wealth distribution, in terms of healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can see all of these things. It's a really great website. And if you ever decide that you want to write a paper and you have to include any of these kind of demographic change information data, Gapminder is one of the best websites to get this information from. A lot of it is gained from US international census data. Okay, so these visual data things we've discussed before, these population pyramids, as we said, they will show us the population structure or the makeup, but they are different shapes based on the number of people who are alive at any given time. So when we're looking at a population pyramid, it is a snapshot. It's a photograph of that population at that particular time. So it'll look at the number of people who are male, the number of people who are female of any given age, but only at a specific time. So it enables us to see, when we compare them, how anything might have changed between those cohort times. So what it tells us what's going on at that particular time, and they give you different stories. So we have 3 different types of population pyramid based on the type of data that we're having. So we have expansive, which is really where we've got lots of people being born. We have constrictive, where we have less people being born at that time. And we have stationary, where we're basically at population replacement levels. So expansive are generally those that we'd call either third world, developing, or now the global south. These are developing countries where we find high levels of birth rate, but also high levels of death rate, especially in terms of infant mortality. So these are the areas where we might not necessarily have high levels of sanitation, high levels of health literacy, for example. And we see that actually the population is relatively stable, but it is relatively young. So there's high levels of people being born, so the average age stays relatively stable, but there's a high turnover, really. In terms of constrictive, these are really where the US currently falls. So we've got low numbers of people being born, we've got equal numbers of about males and females, but we haven't necessarily got population replacement, because we're having less people being born, and we see different waves. So it might be, for example, baby boomers. So after the Second World War, we see a boom in population. But then we might start to see a slowing of that, especially when we're trying to get, or when we see more women remaining in the workforce and having less children. And then we have the stationary. This is generally where we're seeing a lot of Scandinavian countries in Europe at the moment, where we've essentially got similar numbers of people being born as dying, but we've got a really good population distribution in terms of people are surviving into later life because of things like healthcare, because of knowledge around exercise and diet. So basically, we're not seeing people dying off a lot throughout their life course. And when we put this in terms of the demographic transition model, this is 5 stages. So essentially, we have stage 1, which is basically where you've got high birth rates, high death rates in a high fluctuating situation. So here we've got a stable population in terms of the number of people that are there, but we've got a high turnover. We'll see this in terms of one of the charts I'll show you in a second, so don't worry about it too much. Stage 2 is where we start to see that industrial revolution side. So we start to get modern medicine, we start to get this sanitation. So death rate goes down because we're treating people much more effectively. But we've still got that rabbit mentality. We've still got high numbers of people being born. Okay? So we've got lots of people, which is rapid population growth. Not many people dying, but we're still having lots of children in the expectation that we're going to see high levels of infant mortality, which we'd previously seen. Then in stage 3, we continue to see a decrease in the number of people dying of these diseases throughout the life course, but we also see a decrease in birth rates, in infant, what's the word I'm looking for? Fertility rates. Thank you very much for getting there. We see increases in birth control. We see increases in women in the workplace as well. Stage 4, what we see is, again, low birth rates, but low death rates. We have a more stable population in terms of the overall numbers, and this is generally where we see higher levels of education. So we see proliferations of university degrees, we see lower levels of fertility, but we see higher levels of overall life expectancy. And then we have stage 5. Stage 5 is a little bit more of a hypothetical population at the moment, but this is where we start to see population below replacement levels. So, for example, one of the examples of this was actually China and the one-child policy. It was artificially in this situation, but you have more people living into later life, but less people being born. So you've got almost a top-heavy pyramid. You've got more people at the top, less people being born. Okay, that was an artificial situation, but we're starting to see that now in terms of natural progression to stage 5 of that demographic transition model. And you're saying to me, well, what does this look like on a chart, Paul? I can see it in words, but what does it look like in pretty colors? And I'll tell you, it looks like this. So if we're in stage 1, this is where we see at the top. I'm going to see if this actually works now. Does it work? Oh, it does. Yay. So we've got at the top here, you can see what I'm pointing at anyway, high levels of fluctuation between birth rate and death rate, but they're both quite high. But if you've got high levels of birth rate, high levels of death rate, what we see is a relatively stable population. These are the population totals here. So low population, but it's a stable population. Then in stage 2, which is what we're looking at in terms of a standard pyramid shape, is we actually see lower levels of death rate, stable levels of birth rate, and a population explosion. Okay, this is where you start to see more and more people in that population. Then in the stage 3, what we see is a decrease in that birth rate, where people start to understand actually we don't need to have as many kids because they are likely to survive. And population starts to level off towards the end of this stage. Then in stage 4, we have again fluctuating birth and death rates, similarly to as we do in stage 1, but at much lower levels. So rather than having lots of people being born and lots of people dying, we're having less people being born, but also less people dying. So the population is relatively stable, and we see low levels of both birth and death rates. And then in population 5, what we're seeing is kind of where Russia is at the moment, and where other countries are moving towards, is that actually we're seeing lower levels, below replacement levels of birth. So there's more people dying than there's more people living into later life than there are being born. Okay? So this is where we start to see a population shrinking. Okay? So that is, in essence, the demographic transition model. Okay? It's really important for understanding. So in this, we can start to actually put in politics. So this is where we understand that, as I said before, things like war, things like medicine, things like sanitation, things like government policies, like social welfare states, etc., will impact where a country is in terms of its demographic transition. There's another little chart for you that makes it a little bit easier. It's all very, very basic for you, but essentially it's showing exactly the same information. So we're looking at whether a country is in early expanding, whether it's late expanding, and it's all based on how that population is. So in stage 1, we see that it's stationary. In stage 2, we see it's expanding. It still expands in stage 2, in stage 3, becomes much more stationary but stable at stage 4, and we're arguably seeing a less stable but equally stationary population in stage 5. Okay? Anybody have any questions or anything they want to clarify about that demographic transition model? As I said, the reason why we're going over this in week 1 is because demography is the basis to most of the things we're going to discuss. So it's really important you understand this as a key concept. Plus, I can guarantee you now the demographic transition model will be on your midterm. No? Everyone's happy with that? Fabulous. Okay, so one of the other things that's really interesting is the age it takes, or sorry, the length of time it takes for a country to reach a population of 14% where over the age of 60. So this is population aging, not structural aging, but population aging. So what we can see, what we class as more developed countries nowadays, so places like around Europe, the US, so France, for example. Let's take France. It took over 100 years, for their population to go from 7% of their population being over 60 to 14% of their population being over 60. It took them over 100 years. Brazil, Latin American countries, and also places like Singapore and Tunisia, much less time. So 18 years compared to that 115 years. What difference might that make? Anybody? Okay, let me put it a different way. If I gave you 100 years to plan the best birthday party that you could, or I gave you 15 years, which one is going to be better planned? No. If you have more time to do something, it's going to be better prepared for, yeah? So if I said, right, you've got a week for your midterm, or I'm going to give you 2 months for your midterm, which are you going to be better prepared for? 2 months. So if a country takes longer to get to the stage where 14% of its population are over the age of 60, do you think that they're going to have more time to prepare for an aging population? Yes. So what we find is that in countries where they've had longer to get used to this structural aging or the aging population, so they've taken their time to go through these demographic transitions. So France taken over nearly 100 years or over 100 years to go through these different stages in that demographic transition model. They've had time to put into place residential care homes, to understand gerontology, to understand the built and lived environments, to make sure that places are accessible for older adults, to get people trained up as geriatricians, to get a welfare state that is reactive to the needs of an older person, to make sure that housing stock is suitable for older people. Countries like Colombia are going through this at the moment from 2016 to 2038. 22 years, less than one generation or less than one birth cohort to get a population ready for aging. Also, when you look at these countries down here, they are generally countries, not all of them, but generally countries that are struggling with other issues too. Be they internal wars, be they trade deficits, be they massive disparities in wealth, be they issues around healthcare. So what we're finding is that even in these countries, they are starting to experience population aging, but don't necessarily have the infrastructure to support that. So what we have to look at when we look at that demographic transition model, it's not just the demographic transition stage that any country is in, but the time it has taken for them to go through those stages that is important. Does that make sense? Yes, Paul? No, Paul? We're really tired, Paul? All three, Paul? Okay, so basically the important things to remember here is as we go through that demographic transition, what we're experiencing as different structures within that political and social life. So the understanding about healthcare, the understanding and the maintenance of infrastructure that supports healthcare, like sanitation. And what we're finding is that these were generally developed in countries at the top. So for example, things like sewage, sanitation, the flushable toilet, etc., in countries that would be seen now as the global north, or previously more developed countries, yeah? So they've had these things. They've now been thrust into countries that wouldn't necessarily have developed them on their own in that quicker in that quicker span, which are now having aging populations but don't have the infrastructure to deal with that. So by no means am I saying we should never give everybody in the world a flushable toilet and we shouldn't make drugs available to everybody. But what I'm saying is that oftentimes government policies aren't in place to support older adults. Look at the US. Look at the UK. The policies are inadequate to support older adults, to enable them to fulfill their lives in the best possible ways. We know that. That's why we do a lot of the work that we do. We have had many years to get policies in place, and we still don't get it right. Countries that aren't having or don't have the same infrastructure and the same knowledge base as us are also going through aging, and they are not enabling older adults to live necessarily the best possible trajectory. Okay? Does that all make sense? Yes? Fabulous. We'll keep moving on. Swiftly, swiftly. So populations can be summed up as how the population looks at that particular time. When we're looking at an aging population, we're looking at the number of people over the age of about 60. So structural aging, what percentage is structural aging? 30%, exactly. So anything over 30% of the population over the age of 60. Brilliant. We're looking at the driving factors here being things like, so I used to work, before I used to work in academia, I worked as a government statistician. I was one of those boring people. I'm still boring now, but I work in an exciting environment. So there was a department that I used to work for that we colloquially called hatch, match, and dispatch. So it's births, hatch, match, marriages, and dispatch deaths. And that's really, every country will have that kind of department, births, marriages, and deaths, to manage or to monitor what their population is. So when we look at these drivers, their fertility and mortality, so the number of people that are born and the number of people that die, as well as migration, both inward and outward. So those 4 population drivers. So in the midterm, when I ask you how many population drivers are there, you're going to tell me how many? 4. And if I asked you to list them, you might very easily get 4 points. Very easy 4 points. So demographic transition, I can't say often enough, is a really key point to learn because it basically forms the foundation for everything we study in gerontology. As we mentioned, it's happening in different areas of the world at different speeds and with different intensities. So whether or not these countries are actually set up to deal with this and understand what gerontology is. So gerontology is a relatively young science. So USC was the first university in the world to deliver PhDs in gerontology, and we haven't been doing that for very long. So what we know is that gerontology as a science hasn't been studied for very long, and in a lot of countries still isn't studied. So what we find is that actually the governments don't have the right advice because they don't have the right research that's being done in their countries. What we also find is the different challenges around the world. So, for example, there are going to be differences in terms of women's rights around the world. There's going to be differences in terms of LGBT rights around the world. There's going to be differences in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of access to clean water around the world. And all of these things are going to cause differentiation in the levels of expected life expectancy and also their healthy life expectancy. So these political issues are going to influence the stage at which people are at in their demographic transition. And what we find is that these models that we've used only help us to explain the situation as it is, okay? So they enable us to explain why there's fluctuating levels of birth and death rates, why there is an overall population change. We can use them as a predictor, like we said, with stage 5, but generally speaking, what we do is use them to explain the situation that we're in at the moment. And we can map those based on the snapshot of that population pyramid. So depending on the shape of that population pyramid will also enable us to help place a different country into a different stage of that demographic transition model. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's basically trying to draw these links together for you between what a population pyramid is, how that fits into the demographic transition model, and the different things that can influence those transitions. So, why should we care? Let's face it, the US has got clean water, so why should we care what's happening in Colombia? Why should we why should we care what's happening anywhere else in the world? Do we care? Or do we just want cheap imports? Anybody? I get paid. I get to stay here all day. It's fine. I can keep you here all day. Because I've got another 32 slides to get through in the next 20 minutes. Anybody? Anybody? Anybody in the ether online? No? Okay. So I put a few buzz points for you. And seeing as you've been really invested in this particular discussion, I'm going to make it this week's discussion topic online. So I'm not going to discuss these now with you. I'm going to actually post this as your online discussion. Okay? So you're going to have to think about, why should we care about demographic transition? What are the moral arguments for us investing in developing or the global south? What are the political issues that might be faced by a demographic transition, especially a quick demographic transition? And what about the economic issues as well? So I'm going to post that as a discussion, because I've kind of talked about it, but I'm not going to talk about it anymore. So this is a definition for you. I want you to quickly read this, speed read it, and I'm going to ask you for your opinion. This was a definition about what aging is. This was given to us in 1960, so not that long ago, only less than 60 years ago. Is that good, bad, indifferent? As a little bit of a hint for you, I have highlighted certain words. Anybody want to say whether that's a good definition of what aging is and what gerontology is? Because to be able to research something, or research, or however you want to say it, we have to be able to operationalize concepts. So we have to be able to understand what we're measuring. So to do that, we need to operationalize what aging is and what gerontology is. And do you think that's a good definition? Why? See, say it loud enough, I'm going to hear you.
Where was this again? Where did this come from?
1960. Handler, 1960.
Well, this is a bad definition because it points at very negative aspects of getting older. It just basically puts down the fact that when you get older, you're not worthy, or to, it doesn't prepare the society to take care of them. And I think that's why I entered this field, is because I feel like no one is caring for this society, but we care about the births, but not the deaths. Is that enough?
Yes, that'll do. Sorry, I know I really put you on the spot there. I like doing that quite a lot. Especially if you sit at the front, it's less distance for me to walk. I don't like walking that much, especially after 6 hours of teaching. So, yes, this is really a biomedical model of aging, which basically says, as you age, bits are going to start to drop off you. It doesn't look at the social aspects of aging. So again, my grandmother, my mum's mum, who's still alive, she is in her 90s. She eats out most afternoons and evenings. She has a book club that comes to her. She has a Scrabble club that she goes out to. She's also one of the local area coordinators for the Women's Institute and the Mothers Union and the Guild of Older Women for her local community. She is more socially active and engaged than I am. She has much more of a social life than I am, and that you can tell at birthdays and Christmas, because she has cards everywhere from everyone all over the place. I've got about 3, and they're usually all from family members. So what we find is this isn't really a great model. This isn't a great definition of aging. It looks very much at negative assumptions about aging. So not everybody is going to go through all of these stages. bit of an outdated model. So what we've got now is looking at the lifespan developmental approach. Here we're looking at a bit more of a definition that we can kind of get on board with. It's about explaining, it's about describing what's happening, about the explanation and modifications. So changes that happen. So changes happen throughout our life course. They can be positive changes and they can be negative changes. And that's really what the life course theory is about saying. So we're not looking about successful things. We're not looking at biomedical approaches. We're giving an explanation to descriptions that we can observe. And we're looking at life course between conception and death, okay? So life would arguably start before you're actually born. So although you probably have your birthday whenever you have your birthday, it's probably about 9 months before, you could argue, as that's when you were technically alive. And it goes all the way through to death. And we look at the transitions that occur. So there are 3 assumptions within that life course approach and the life course theory. Again, really important to know these because the whole of this course is lifespan developmental psychology. So we will be pulling on the life course theory. So it's saying that development is a lifelong process. By that, what we mean is we don't stop changing as we get to the age of 60 or 65. These are social constructs. We have a retirement age, but we are not born with a retirement age. The government gives us a retirement age, okay? These are social constructs. We continue to develop and we continue to change till the day that we die. We continue to develop relationships. We continue to develop in our knowledge base, in our wisdom base. These are 2 things that we're going to come back to later on in the course, and we're going to look at the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Also, development that occurs throughout our whole life course is a process of adaptation. So this basically means changes. So things are going to happen throughout our life. You're going to go through certain age normative changes. So you're going to go through to college, you're going to have a job, you're going to retire, you're going to have certain physical changes. They might be positive, they might be negative. But these are going to be normative changes, things that you would expect to happen. Arguably, nowadays, marriage isn't necessarily one of them because not that many people are choosing to get married. So we can see these different changes. And also that development and those changes can be multi-directional. So as we age, some things are going to be good, some things are going to be bad, and some things are going to continue as normal. So I personally cannot wait to retire. I want to have a social life. All of the older people I've ever grown up with have had an amazing social life, and I don't. Okay? So I want that. Also, I understand there are going to be certain losses. So for example, when I was a kid growing up, my grandmother would route march us 4.5 miles into town every single Saturday at 6 a.m., do her morning shop at the local greengrocers, then we'd route march back with everything, then she'd whisk us off to church, then we'd come back, and then we'd clean her house. She still walks 4 miles a day into town, but she doesn't do it quite as quickly, and she might stop and have a coffee halfway. So what we see is there's some mobility changes, but that is to do with the continuity as well. The action is still staying the same. She's still doing the same things. It's just maybe taking a little bit longer due to functional losses. Okay? So those losses and those changes, across the life course are multi-directional. It's how we choose to go through what we're going to discuss later on in the semester is selection, optimization, and compensation. So selecting what is important, optimizing your skills to maintain those skills and to maintain that functioning, and to compensate for any actual or perceived losses. And then there's also another rule of 3. There are 3 influences on that development. So we have age normative influences, historically normative influences, and non-normative influences. Who wants to suggest what might be an age normative influence on your development? So by age normative, what we mean is something that is normal for people to go through at particular ages in their development.
Puberty?
Puberty is pretty age normative. Most people will go through puberty, yes. Anything else? Anything more social? What's a normal thing for people to do in their life course? Anybody? By the way, I'm going to keep asking these questions 15 weeks. Sorry? Yeah, we grow up. So that's going to be in terms of our relationships. It's going to be in terms of our development and also in terms of our academia as well. So there's certain things that happen. So we can expect puberty. We can expect menopause. We can expect people moving out of their parents' homes. We can expect people to get married. We can expect people potentially to retire. That's becoming less normative because we now actually have a process called unretirement, which is where you go from having retired to realizing you either want to go back to paid employment or have to, and you get another job. So unretirement is now a phrase that's coming into vogue. So those are normative, age normative influences. Then we have historically normative influences. What do you think those might be? So we've got things that happen to everybody. So World War II, that was a historically normative event. The development of the internet. So for example, my grandmother's generation didn't grow up with the internet. Your generation is now the I generation. You grew up with the internet. Bless you. You grew up with the internet. So these things are normative. Bless you again. And also we've got things like the global financial crisis. These are global normative. These are things that affect the whole of the world, okay? And then we have non-normative influences. So things that might influence us that are not normal. So these are mainly around disease, disability. Arguably, one of those categories is moving to become more normative. Divorce. But these are things that are more linked to an individual. So you can't expect them to happen as part of an aging process. You shouldn't expect them as part of a global process, but they can happen to an individual, okay? So for example, not everybody's going to have kids, not everybody's going to develop diseases, not everybody's going to emigrate to a different country, and not everybody's going to divorce, okay? So these are non-normative. And what we find as we go through the life course, these different stages of, or these different types of influence will affect us at different rates, okay? Does that make sense? Can you follow where I'm going with? So what I'm trying to say is keep those in your mind. So what age normative is, what history normative, and what non-normative influences are. What we find is that they are age graded. So normative or age normative tend to influence younger people more. So things like puberty, things like going to school, things like your first date, things like buying a house, etc. All of these are affecting younger people more. As we age, what we find is we go through. So history normative tends to affect people in adolescence and early adulthood more. So when we're looking at things like war, this is the group that generally gets sent to war. When we're looking at pandemics, these are often the age groups that get affected by that. So things that are more historically normative, okay? These affect middle age. And those people in later life tend to be affected more by non-normative events. So things like dementia, so Alzheimer's disease, disability, other things like this. So we find that these are much more. So as we go through the lifespan, we go from age normative, historically normative to non-normative life events having a larger influence on our life. Obviously, I'm not saying that if there's a global downturn that it's not going to affect older people, but what we're saying is that non-normative events will impact much more than the other types of events. Okay? Does that make sense? Fabulous. Don't worry, we are nearly at the end. I can see you all starting to flag slightly. So, I normally have something else on there, but I've taken it away for whatever reason. What are the key points that you have learnt so far today? Bear in mind, I will ask this question at the end of every single lecture, and nobody leaves until I get at least a few answers. Okay? And I'm being serious. So what have we learned? What have we gone through today? What are your takeaway messages? I.e., what do you think might be on the midterm? Anybody? Go for you first. Now I'm going to take somebody from the middle group. So somebody from the middle group, get an idea. Thanks, sir.
We actually we learned the 3 assumptions and 3 influences for the lifespan development view.
Yeah.
And we kind of looked through a lot of graphs about the datas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we've looked at is what can influence how we progress through the life course. So what are the influences on the life course theory? What are the factors that can influence that? And what influence do they have on us at different stages of the life course? Anything else?
That a country is considered to be structurally aging when more than 30% of the population is over the age of 65.
Exactly. So what we're looking at here is influences that are going to change the way a population is structured. So the number of people over the age of 60. Okay? Anything else? Okay, so I would argue that you need to remember the drivers for population change. You need to look at the demographic transition model and understand what it is and what it shows, the same as what population pyramids show, what they can be used to show, and how they can be influenced by politics, etc., etc. So, what we're going to do next week is we're going to build on that, and we're going to look at subjective experiences of aging and build on this research. So how do we do research in aging populations? Okay, don't worry. So what I will do at the start of next week, we will do an overview of what we've done from this week. That means I'm going to ask you the questions, what did we study last week? And you're going to tell me what we studied last week, okay? And then we're going to move on to this, and then at the end we'll have a recap of what we're doing. Okay. How many people have you heard of International Day of Older People? A few of you. Fabulous. I'm going to tell you about this every single week until it happens too. So this is a United Nations Day that is mandated on the 1st of October every single year, and this is the first year that USC is marking this celebration. It's the first year because it's the first year I've made them do it. It's because I used to do this and used to mark this in the UK every single year and put a program together. We're doing this and we're doing it with USC style this year, and we're doing it here. So we're having 5 sites around campus. We're going to show off the research that we do here in the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology in the courtyard. On Truesdale, we're going to show the whole of campus what learning opportunities you have through gerontology here. By the bookstore, we're going to have the Student Gerontological Association show you how they can enhance your career prospects, what they can do for you in terms of volunteering, in terms of getting involved. We've also, how many of you have heard of the film that's out at the moment called The Farewell? It's currently in the cinema. We have, fresh off the press, about 2.5 hours ago, secured the license to show The Farewell, which is currently in the cinemas. We are going to be showing that on the 1st of October with potentially the directors there as well to have a discussion about the meanings of that film. And that's going to be in the University Club. And then we also have a stage and marquee and food trucks on the quad, on the McCarthy quad. Here we're going to have older people. We're going to have a dementia choir. So older adults with dementia who are going to be singing. And we're going to be talking about the benefits of music in later life with people that are living with dementia. We've got an ethical debate. So for example, around euthanasia that's going to be happening with some of our undergraduate students. We've also got people who are going to be playing string quartets. We've got tap dancers. We've got yoga and Tai Chi that you can all get involved with as well as a networking opportunity. So we've got older professors, we've got people from the world of work as well as from government, all here that you can then speak to, you can network with, as well as learn from. So the whole day is going to be about celebrating. And as if you needed anything else to celebrate, if you go to each one of those sites, you can win prizes from gerontology. There you go, almost like I didn't have to prompt you. And if you go to each one of those sites, you can be entered into a raffle prize draw of winning $100 worth of Amazon vouchers, even more woo. So there is an awful lot going on. If you want to get involved in it, please let me know. If you want to go to any of those sites, please turn up. Have a fabulous time. These flyers are about, and we're going to be publicizing it. There are going to be hundreds of people on site. This is a really big celebration for the city of Los Angeles, and we are making this known. USC is going to be I think probably one of the only places that celebrates this year in LA, and we're going to really do it in style. Okay, so if you've got lectures on that day, obviously go to your lectures. If you haven't, or you want to do it between them, there's something going on somewhere on campus between the hours of 10 in the morning and 8 at night. So there's always going to be something for you to do. Okay, as I said, my office hours are on Mondays between 11 and 2. Monday is obviously Labor Day, but if you want to arrange meetings with me at any other point, please drop me an email. If you've got questions, please make sure you send them to myself and Kelly. If you've got any questions you want to put on Blackboard, feel free, but make sure that you complete the task that's going to be put onto Blackboard by the start of the lecture next week. The earlier you do it, the better, because it means that other people will be able to respond to your posts and you will be able to respond to other people's. If you all leave it until Thursday morning next week, then no one is going to be able to write posts that are very detailed, okay? Otherwise, have a fantastic Labor Day weekend, and I will see you next week.
Thank you. If anybody needs a flyer for the workshops on how to do research, I've got about half a dozen here, so come get them if you want one. I saw some hand
I
go
forgot
up.
that, sorry.